Yeah.
We'll get rolling.
Wonderful.
All right.
Hello,
We
everyone.
don't even need to clap this time.
No.
We figured out a new method.
Well, it's not as good a method because his audio quality is what it is, but
Right.
that's
But it
due to
is what it
circumstances.
is.
Yes, we will make deer. When in Milwaukee, you make beer. And you make do. So, hello everybody. We're back after like a month. Because
It's been
that's the reality that we live in now. But
Yeah.
we're here and we're happy.
Really.
I'm happy. It's a nice day. It's like
It is a lovely
in the
day.
60s. It's sunny, light breeze, raked
2022.
leaves. It's life is good. How is life you in Milwaukee there?
Yes, life in Milwaukee is good. I'm out here visiting a couple of Josh's friends who are acquaintances of mine through IPF. He went to Josh, for those who may not remember, is one of my diocesan brothers in seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just visiting a couple guys out here at St. Francis de Sales.
Lovely, lovely.
Neat.
So is this the seminary is located in Milwaukee then?
Yeesh. We're like probably the road's like 100 feet from the lake.
Nice.
So it's right on the lake shore. It's a very nice
That's
old
like
building.
Lake Michigan, right? Or
Yes,
okay.
I believe it's Lake Michigan. Yeah.
Is it like more or less opposite of Chicago on like the other side of the lake, more or less?
Yeah, kind of on that
But to
north
the north,
south.
yeah. That's kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
On the west coast.
On the west coast, yeah, I'd be like, yeah, I'm on the west coast of Lake Michigan. I've been to the west coast of Lake Superior. Gosh, until you said that just now, I never thought of making that joke. It's I'll have to use that. So yeah,
We don't have a north coast or south coast. There is a south coast.
there's the South Shore. That's also in Wisconsin.
Oh,
The
yes.
Apostle Islands and
Yeah.
all that. I'll have to. I've seen the
North
Apostle
Shore.
Islands from a great distance, but I've never been to them. I've heard they're pretty cool. So, but yes, we haven't talked to Riley in a while either. So how's life?
Life has been good. We are just, the prepideutic life goes as it does. Like, there isn't really a lot to talk about because it's
Sure.
all kind of the same, but that's the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
It's just a very simple and day-to-day life, and yeah, I guess we're reading.
Semi-monastic, I suppose.
It's semi-monastic, yeah, but we're allowed to like go places and stuff too.
That's good. That's kind of cool.
We've been reading some interesting texts. We've been reading the Plato's Timaeus, which is a very, very strange, basically a gigantic monologue about likely theories of the origin of the cosmos, which is interesting to interpret.
From
but
like
there's
the
lots of-
ancient Greek perspective.
Yeesh.
Nice.
It's very interesting because Plato is like, yeah, any account of existence is insufficient, and because it's a finite account of a finite thing, so any story is as good as any other. But here's some random story.
It's like, and it's just
Because-
me spitballing here.
And is it more
Yes,
scientific than philosophical, or is it more philosophical in nature?
It's not really philosophical at all. That's what's very interesting about it.
He's
There
basically
are nuggets. There are nuggets of Plato's thought embedded in it, but it's also like it's narrated through a different character than Socrates, which is his usual mouthpiece.
mm-hmm.
It's voice. The monologue is done by Timaeus.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Because as we've discussed on the podcast before, a plausible theory is that Socrates was not a real person, but a persona created by Plato to explain ideas, like a pen name, more or less.
to be the ideal philosopher, someone who's not an aristocrat and doesn't have money, but does the philosophy thing anyway.
And poisoning him with hemlock is probably a metaphor for completely rejecting the idea and wanting you out of their life. Or they killed a guy with hemlock. Either way.
Either way. But yes, we've been reading, let's see, what else? Letters from Lake Como, which is a series of letters from Romano Guardini, kind of one of the influences on Ratzinger. And it's kind of his tirade against technology.
This is my Luddite manifesto, but not quite. All right, that's right.
I've been doing a lot of for fun readings as well.
Ooh, yeah. What you
picking up Lord of the Rings again after many of you.
Have you've read it all the way through before, right?
I maybe uncertain.
Sure.
It was in middle school I picked it up, and I can't remember if I ever got all the way through it.
It's a tough read in middle school. I think I was well into high school when I read it all the way through.
I never actually had to read it personally. That was during a period of time where we read books as a family. So Dad read through all the Lord of the Rings with us. We read through all the Harry Potters as a family. We read through Dracula and
Frankenstein?
Not Frankenstein.
Okay.
Actually, I haven't read that one. I ought to. But also like Christmas Carol and stuff like that. So that was a fun period of time. And also, we read the books and then we turned around and watched the movies.
That's in the proper order.
Indeed.
Yeah,
part of the thing is like I know the events so well from the movies, and I'm like aware of the events that aren't in the movies or like glossed over,
and vice versa.
There's some nuance and detail in the books that isn't present in the movie, just because you kind of can't in that way because it's some difference in medium.
Some Tolkien purists like to gripe about the stuff they put in the movie and didn't include, but like honestly, it's as close to one-to-one adaptation as you can get away with.
One-to-one,
as close as you can, compared to most other adaptations.
That's the thing about adaptation, right? You adapt. Right? So there are things that will not work in the pacing of a book that work in a movie, and vice versa.
Virtually all the major plot points, though, are covered with a little bit of embellishment and adjustment for narrative.
For the sake of
obviously, the Scouring of the Shire was left out because you would have had to have made like a fourth movie to get that out of the way.
And that does kind of defeat some of the point the original book wants to go for. Mm-hmm. But I see why they did it for the movie's sake. You know, it's tricky. It's the thing.
So, yeah, it's kind of I mean, having watched the movies when I was 10 and read the books when I was probably 14, 15, like I can't help but imagine the movie as I'm reading the book.
Well, also just because they cast the
very well cast
so perfectly,
and the way the creative work they did. John's probably sitting here listening to the podcast right now, screaming at like, "Just review Lord of the Rings already! You're already talking about it."
I mean, we could also do Rings of Power, although I have not much to say on it.
And just troll him. I think what we would have to say about Rings of Power is probably not a whole lot different from what a lot of people who have given it an honest look have said. So, in the last month or so, Nathan and I have been watching Rings of Power to see what all the fuss is about.
There's one episode we have left to watch, but honestly, I don't think it's going to greatly sway my opinion, which is I don't have strong feelings about it.
Yeah, my take right now is it's neither as bad as its worst critics say or as good as its best defenders say. It's visually stunning to watch. The writing is meh, and there are too many characters.
Well, here's the thing: they could make too many characters work. That's how they did Lord of the Rings, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem I have is I don't care.
Yeah,
I would like to care. I would love to care. I would love to hate this show. I would rather hate this show than have lukewarm feelings on it.
As Jesus said in the gospel, like, I wish you were either hot or cold, and the lukewarm I'll spit out of my mouth.
Right.
Something to that effect. But I don't know. I don't feel like I wasted my time necessarily watching the show.
And yet in 8 episodes, they failed to cover as much ground as a single 3-hour film. Yeah.
It's kind of like... yeah, I don't know. I feel like there would be enough content, enough to go over in an episode as sort of a breakdown of what works and what doesn't.
That might be more of a little bit outside what we do in this podcast.
I mean, it's more or less what we did with The Hobbit. It wouldn't be as, it's not as bad as The Hobbit.
Yeah.
I'll say that. It's not as good as The Lord of the Rings. It's not as bad as The Hobbit. Yeah. I actually, the acting is pretty decent. I think they did a good job with that. Most of my issues are with like the story choices they decided to make. Mm-hmm. It sort of gave me a weird Kenobi flashbacks where I'm like, why did they choose to do it this way? Doesn't that kind of mess with the canon? And then as the series gets closer to the end, I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing. That fixes it a little bit. There's a weird deja vu there. I mean,
at least I actually thoroughly enjoyed the last 2 episodes of Kenobi.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a sort of swim at your own risk type of series. Not risk, but like it's
your mileage may vary.
Yeah. That's what we have to say.
There you go. There's our review.
It's not the dumb LGBTQ woke agenda, as people say. That's
my biggest problem with Durin's wife is not that they cast a black woman; it's that she doesn't have a beard. Give the dwarf women beards.
I wonder though if like if they were afraid of people's reactions if they did that, like in a weird way.
But it's
like people do understand the Tolkien lore. People understand the Tolkien lore, but at the same time, like in the current climate, I wonder if they were like, let's not go there with the stuff they were already doing. That's pure speculation.
And don't do the stuff you're already doing and go with the lore.
Yeah. Speaking of the stuff we're already doing, we're the Palladium Papists. I'm James.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Riley.
We're doing an episode of Philmosophical today,
but not on. Well, actually, that would be Super Serial if we were.
It would be Super Serial if it was Rings of Power.
Either of the things we were talking about.
But yes, we are going to talk about Mel Gibson's. I think it was Mel Gibson. Yeah, Hacksaw Ridge.
In a world where one man will decide whether to pull a lever and kill one man, or not pull a lever and allow 5 people to die, find out in Philmosophical.
So, Philmosophical, the show where we get philosophical about films.
Yes. Right. So, for those who, well, I'm not going to say for those who haven't filmed, we've never seen it. I'm not even going to take that into account because we never do. The movie is based on the life of Desmond Doss, a man who, a true story of a guy in World War II who was, I believe, not a Seventh-day Adventist. I get those two mixed up a lot. They're completely different. But he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he is a conscientious objector to violence who nonetheless joins, I believe, the Army. It's not the Marines. I'm pretty sure it's the Army. He joins the Army to be a combat medic because while he doesn't want to take life...
In World War II, by the way.
Yeah, in World War II. He doesn't want to take life, but he still wants to serve his country and save life. And so the movie more or less follows the events of his life. It's more or less, it's a biopic, basically.
Right. So, I mean, it's punched up for dramatic effect from time to time, but it covers the major beats of his life.
Yeah. So Desmond, he grows up in rural Virginia with his brother and his parents. His father is a member of the Lost Generation from World War I, is like plagued with PTSD, and doesn't look anything like Elrond or Agent Smith, but he's Hugo Weaving. No, he looks, suspiciously like those two characters, pardon me. Same actor. But yeah, he's kind of an alcoholic, has anger issues, domestic troubles and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so over the course of growing up, Desmond has, and I haven't done the research to see if these actually happened or not, but for the sake of the story, we'll just roll with it. A couple of key events happen in his life that shape his morals. One of which is in anger once when tussling with his brother, he grabs a rock and hits his brother over the head with a rock and almost kills him, which
that shakes
shakes him to his core. And when he's a bit older, his father and mother are having a fight, and his father's threatening their mother with a gun, and so Desmond rips the gun away and almost shoots his dad. A second experience, which also shakes him to his core. So from that moment, he vows never to take a life and never to pick up a gun, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And he's deeply religious, devoted, Seventh-day Adventist. They have certain practices. I believe, they go to church on Saturday, and they don't eat meat, or he doesn't eat meat. I'm not sure if that's something they all do or if that's something
it's his personal choice.
He's a vegetarian. So, despite his father's wishes, he's very jaded from his experience in the First World War. He joins the army, wanting to save life as a medic, because he meets and falls in love with a nurse at the local hospital, and they court and get engaged as he's getting ready to go off to war. So as he gets into the army, everything goes well at first. He's doing well in basic training courses and is kind of at the top of his class. But when it comes time to do weapons training, he says, "Sorry, sir, I am a conscientious objector. I will not touch a rifle." And so this leads to a lot of ridicule and retribution from his peers and his officers, until finally he ends up in a court-martial, upon which he is acquitted of disobeying orders because, according to the First Amendment to the Constitution, he has the right to practice his religious belief while still being in the armed services. So he's allowed to be an unarmed combat medic, which his peers both kind of respect and also kind of feel like they can't trust him, because the whole idea in the army is that, everybody's got a gun so we can defend each other. What are we going to do about this guy who doesn't have a gun? Yeah, he's a medic, but if he can't watch our back, how can we watch his? But they arrive, I believe.
They're in the Japanese campaign here.
Yep. They're deployed to the Battle of Okinawa. So at this stage of the war, I believe in 1944, the U.S. is kind of doing its island hopping campaign to taking over Japanese territories closer and closer to Japan. And the closer they get to Japan, I believe Okinawa is considered one of the home islands, one of the smaller ones near the homeland, but that's still got a cultural Japanese population. The closer they get to the Japanese homeland, the more fiercely and to the last man the Japanese defend it. Being to that point an imperialistic warrior culture, with high standards of honor. So the fighting is incredibly brutal for both sides. And so they land on Okinawa and get thrown basically right into the meat grinder. Some very difficult battles. And
in particular, there's this one sheer cliff they need to climb up.
Yep.
Hacksaw Ridge is what they call it.
Onto this plateau, that's a key overlook that they need to get. So
because
Desmond's unit gets sent up the cliff and onto the plateau and have a couple of grisly battles with the Japanese with heavy casualties on both sides. So the unit they're relieving, the medics are kind of telling the new guys, okay, it's going to be bad. Here's how to triage, you have to learn to see when that guy's not going to make it and you go to the next one. So Desmond gets right to work, basically. And he learns that the Japanese are targeting medics. So he has to take off his Red Cross and things like that to avoid being a target so he can help his men. So at one point, the Americans are overrun and driven off the cliff by the Japanese. And this happens so rapidly that a lot of the wounded are left behind on the ridge.
And to cover the American escape, they get the
Navy,
ships,
the Navy
to bombard the ridge.
Yeah. So Desmond, not wanting to give up, I forget if he goes back up or if he remains.
He remains up there.
Yeah.
And under the cover of the bombardment, he begins sneaking wounded down from the ridge.
Mm-hmm. So he finds men who are still alive, treats them, sneaks them back to the ridge where they have like this rope ladder set up, and he starts lowering one by one all these wounded men by rope to the Americans below so they can be rescued. So he basically, for an entire night, one by one, he's getting these guys, bringing them back to the cliff, saying every time, "Please, Lord, let me get one more." Working himself to the bone. Let's see.
Even after the bombardment cover ceases, he continues.
There's still a lot of danger because there's Japanese patrols and things to avoid. Like he gets so into rescuing people that he even rescues a couple of like Japanese wounded, and he treats everybody the same. So he's eventually like obviously all of this earns the respect of the men in his unit, and over the course of the one night, he rescued 75 soldiers from the ridge, and later on was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions above and beyond the call of duty. So eventually he's wounded by a grenade blast and he's taken out of the fighting. And it's kind of like at the end of the movie, they play footage of an interview. I believe he passed away in 2006, so a while before they made the film. But they had interview footage of him and photos and things like that they played at the end, which was very great.
And also interviews of his people on his squad and his commander. So that he was very highly respected by his peers by the end of it. Like, they ended up being very accommodating. Like he would take time to pray and they'd be like, "Well, we're not moving till he's ready to go." And he's like, "Well, he doesn't want to eat meat, so this is what we got for him." Things like that. So overall, very selfless and brave man. And that's Hacksaw more or less the events of the movie. Yeah.
There's not very much plot, but it is very.
It's more about how it's presented.
Yes, it's all about the presentation, which we'll get into. Have you seen Hacksaw Ridge, Riley?
I have not.
Okay. So
there was actually
we can just get into what we like
into cool stuff.
Yeah.
One thing I kind of liked about there was some interesting imagery they used. So at the beginning of the movie, there's that flashback when him and his brother are kids, and he takes a brick and hits his brother with it. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, when we find out his brother's okay, his dad, being the disciplinarian that he is, takes his belt off, and it's implied that he beats his son.
Mm-hmm.
First time we meet him as an adult, he's helping out at the church or something, and then there's an accident outside where a guy gets crushed under a car when he's trying to fix it, right?
He's starting to bleed out from his leg.
To bleed out. So Desmond runs out there, grabs a brick to prop up the car, and uses his belt to cinch the wound.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately basically we have this theme of the same tools that are used to bring about harm are used to bring about healing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he takes that guy to the hospital and meets his girlfriend, who's the nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Toward the end of the movie, he swears he's never going to pick up a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing he does is one of his commanding officer is one of the last guys he saves.
Mm-hmm.
He grabs his gun and uses it to drag his officer toward the ridge. So once again, we have this tool he swore never to touch to bring harm. He's using as a means of healing and saving somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that imagery and symbolism was very well executed, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some cool things.
It was set up like early on with that, and then it paid off right at the end.
Yep. He saves Sergeant Vince Vaughn. Yeah, he's apparently not too good at dodging bullets. But yeah, that was some good stuff. The other cool things, his relationship with his eventual wife in the movie is kind of a little bit of a side plot, but very good. He's sort of a wide-eyed, innocent country boy. Meets her in the hospital when he rescues this guy Nathan was talking about at the beginning. Falls in love with her, but he's kind of clumsy about it. like on their first date, he like goes in for a kiss when she wasn't expecting it, and she slaps him. He's like, I thought you would like it. She's like, well, I would if you asked. But then she's like, and then she asks him, like, all right, well, like
doing this again sometime.
Yeah. and then another echo of that later is like, he's dropping her off at work, and he's like, I'm going to go to war, and she's like, well, you can ask me to marry you or what? And I was like, I didn't know if you were ready for that. I was like, well, I would have said yes if you asked. And he's like, all right, well, you want to marry me then?
I'm mad at you right now, but yes.
Yeah. So they have a great loving relationship. I believe, yeah, they were married until she died in 1991. So
yeah.
Pretty good relationship there.
Another neat side story is his dad's development.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he plays a key part. And again,
absolutely.
I haven't done the research to see if this was something they made up for the movie or not. But because his dad being a veteran of the First World War, when he learns about the trouble that Desmond's in for disobeying orders and not using a rifle, he goes to his court he managed to use his connection because there's this key general in Washington who was his commanding officer during the First World War. So even though like he's always visiting the graves of his friends that went with him to war and died, he has this whole monologue about how like I think his other son comes to the table one night wearing a uniform. He's like, a uniform looks great. I also had a friend who looked great in a uniform, but he got shot in it and ruined his uniform. So despite how much he hates his army experience and what it did to him, for the sake of his son, he's very much a flawed character, but he does love his son. He puts on his old uniform and goes to Washington to enlist the help of this general he knows, who writes a letter or basically ordering the court-martial to let him exercise his constitutional rights. So that was kind of a cool side story as well.
Yeah, but seeing because his father's like view of it is how needless the loss of life is in war, and how he felt used and meaningless, and how the deaths of his friends, what became of that.
Yep. And he sort of comes around to see Desmond's angle where he's like, I'm not there to participate in like the violence. I'm there to try to bring life where I can. So, or save lives where I can. So he's fighting the war in his own, and serving in his own way.
So his coming around was a very neat side story part of it also.
Mm-hmm. And there's some stuff, it gets like, it falls into sort of the common World War II movie tropes where it's like, oh, here's these characters in his squad and they fill these different archetypes and all that stuff. But there's this one guy who at first is like super hostile to Desmond, and then eventually they become friends, and of course he dies. So there's that whole thing. But
in fact, there's a scene early on when Desmond's giving his squadron kind of a bad rep because of his desire to not hold a rifle, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone else is like, well, everyone basically gangs up to push him out.
Well, yeah, and at one point beat him to a pulp.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
And so afterwards...
in real life, he underwent some crazy stuff because of all that.
But when he gets eventually allowed to stay on the team, right, and his commanding officer asks him who did it, he sticks up for his aggressors.
Yeah, he doesn't turn him in.
He turns the other cheek and looks out for his and loves his enemies, essentially.
Yep. So overall, good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we can get into some transcendentals here. First, the main thing will be like truth. So obviously, being a Seventh-day Adventist, there's some difference on sort of the pacifism that we might have. Not that we're necessarily for killing people, but others...
which we're very not for killing people.
Right.
When one can avoid it.
Yeah. So there's the whole Catholic idea of just war, right? And obviously killing is evil to be avoided, but one may justifiably kill as a soldier when necessary to protect life and the innocent and so forth. And others make the point to Desmond, like, almost no other religion takes issue with, killing in a just war. Like, why are you being such a stickler about this? But Desmond, I think, despite that sort of flawed doctrinal logic, I suppose, his aim is indeed noble, like wanting to save life as a medic and be a non-combatant.
And even when he's talking about, in retrospect, the incident where he turns his father's gun on him.
Yep.
Right? It's like, I didn't shoot my father, but in my heart, I did. Like, violence in general is just very abhorrent to him because of just what it can do to a person. He has seen what it has done to his father, and he would like very much to avoid that. And he knows that that violence is a very awful thing to partake in and undergo for both parties.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think that was mainly what I wanted to say about that. Any comments there, Riley?
The one thing I had was, like, I'm interested to see, like, if there's any Cain and Abel parallels with this guy and his brother and his dad, like, to look at some of that.
Yeah. I mean, there is
the on the rock smashing thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like,
I think there's that image, that motif, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it does use a lot of biblical imagery. In fact, when he's looking at the "Thou shalt not kill" commandment picture, is that a picture of Cain and Abel?
I think there was, yeah.
So, which is that imagery of a brother killing a brother, which mankind, we're all brothers. So what turning
and one of the main,
on one another
which is an important thing to remember, because the Second World War obviously is the most, like, in terms of human life, one of the most destructive events in world history. And oftentimes, particularly in the Pacific War, the humanity of the combatants was obfuscated towards each other. For the American side, seeing the absolute, basically no holds barred approach, that the basically fight to the death fanaticism they saw out of the Japanese soldiers, and the sort of callous racism on the side of the Americans very much obfuscated the humanity. So Desmond's witness, because he even, like, manages to treat and rescue a couple of Japanese soldiers that he finds as well. He manages to, like, remind everyone that they're still human beings in the midst of this conflict. So that was a worthwhile thing to bring up, I think.
Yeah.
Let's see, any other elements of truth? I mean, fortitude is a virtue he definitely displays throughout everything. And it's not as if, like, he's completely, like, passive all the way through his, like, court-martial process either. Like, he's very
he stands up to defend himself, but verbally.
He still struggles with, like, doubts and things like that. It's like, am I really on, in the right for doing this? And there's, debate to be had, but overall his fortitude is commendable.
And his devotion,
I suppose,
to
we're more in the goodness realm now, so let's just do that. Goodness.
Right. But, like, if you look at his devotion to his faith, at first he is terribly ridiculed for it.
Yep.
Everyone looks at him as a fool and an idiot, and why would you join the army if you're like this? But through persistence and showing the good that comes of his faith, and what his faith means to him and what it means to them,
and ultimately expressing sacrificial love, because being a combat medic in the Second World War would have been hell of its own.
So through that he gains respect, right? So the fortitude in living his faith brings about fruit and respect of others.
Yeah. So it's remarkable that he won the Medal of Honor and lived to talk about it, because many who are awarded the Medal of Honor die in the process of, in the action that got them the award to begin with. So the people who survive is like even more remarkable. And saving 75 people by yourself in a combat zone is
while
insane.
you're being shelled.
Yeah. And like likely somewhat wounded himself. Yeah, it's just insane. So it's a testament to his fortitude right there. So fortitude and Christ-like love for his brothers are basically his two like top qualities, I guess I'd say, in the movie.
Yeah.
Also his girlfriend then wife is a very supporting figure.
Oh, absolutely.
Although at times, like, she struggles as well, because like the day they were supposed to get married, he gets imprisoned for a court martial. So she has to very much struggle and sacrifice on his behalf, and challenges him a little bit on his pacifism. But he manages to, stay strong in a loving way towards her. Like, he's like, "What, are you betraying me now too?" But then she comes around and supports him. So, and they have a very loving relationship. So that's a very good thing in the movie. And even though his father, like we talked about, is deeply flawed, alcoholic, PTSD,
and it's not all entirely his fault either. It's
right.
His damaged by the war, because
it makes life very painful for his mother, for Desmond's mother. But like, he's not a complete monster per se, at least the way the movie portrays him. So he's still able to, despite his flaws, show love for his son and help him when he needs him the most.
Because of and for his son, he becomes better and eventually, comes to his aid when he needs him, facing his past demons by putting the uniform back on. Yeah.
Let's see. Beauty. Beauty, relatively speaking. I mean, we're talking about a very, very violent movie. The execution of the movie, obviously, like the set design, the uniforms, everything's like period accurate, stuff like that. The note I will make, though, and this is something my brother mentioned to me when I was telling him I was going to watch it. He's like, keep in mind, the violence, it's a Mel Gibson movie. There's a lot of pathos to the presentation of the violence. It's very dramatic presentation of violence.
May not be literally how it looked, but it's trying to convey more how it would
There
feel.
is lots of gore, but it's very like almost stylized gore. It's not necessarily the most realistic. It's kind of over the top. That being said, obviously war gets very gory. But I think what Mel Gibson seems to be uncannily good at is A, telling, well-structured story, B, portraying the sorrow inherent to violence. Obviously, biggest example would be like, say, The Passion of the Christ, or debatably Braveheart. There's some South Park bits about Mel Gibson that are coming to mind. I'm trying to not think about.
Quote.
But that very much is evident in this movie, and it's very, me being the war movie buff I am, like, violence in films doesn't affect me the same way as others who are more sensitive to that type of thing. So I would say watch at your own risk if violence and gore and stuff like that is very troubling to you.
And
I wouldn't recommend watching it.
It's purposeful for storytelling,
right? In the face of great evil and suffering and death, that makes the actions of Desmond Doss to save the lives of his fellow men even more commendable, and a light in the darkness is sort of the point of the movie.
And they do a lot of that visually symbolic, right? There's a lot of like, they do quite a bit of light and dark.
And it shows that Desmond's not the only one who is like a heroic figure too. Like one of the other combat medics like refuses plasma. Like he sort of like hides how much he's been injured, and like it's like, here, go give it to that guy. He's like, you're gonna die of shock. It's like, don't worry, I'll be fine. And indeed, that medic did end up dying of shock. So there's others who also laid their lives on the line, to unsung heroes, as it were, that did their best to save life.
Yeah, it's not Desmond single-handedly. He gets bailed out by his friends. They cover for him, and he covers for them. Yeah.
So,
and also the writing's good, the acting's good. Andrew Garfield's better here than he was as Spider-Man.
Yeah, actually, this was not long after that. I think the second
I don't think
Spider-Man
movie.
Yeah. So he's actually a pretty good actor. He's had some pretty significant roles that he's done quite well.
And of course, Hugo Weaving's a fantastic actor and does a great job as his father. And there's just some good acting, some good writing, strong direction choices.
Yep. Good sound design and music and so forth. The fight choreography, again, is kind of dramatized, so I'm not going to get into how little it was huge waves of men in World War II crashing into each other. It's sort of made it like Braveheart with guns a little bit. But it's Mel Gibson's going to Mel Gibson, so. Unity. What brings everything together?
Violence is kind of the central theme.
Yeah.
It's about what it does
life
to
and
a
death.
person. Life and death, yeah.
Yeah, let's see. But yeah, that's sort of fortitude and charity are the like two big virtues on display. Like charity in like the highest sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's self-sacrificial love. Yeah, that's pretty much.
And it kind of it questions what the place of violence is in human culture and what in our lives, and it's like, do you want to engage in that if you can avoid it?
Yeah, and it doesn't sugarcoat the brutality of war. Like oftentimes, everybody's favorite modern narrative is about World War II and the Greatest Generation, but acts of brutality abounded in World War II. And equally abounding were acts of great heroism and sacrifice. So it's important to look at World War II and these stories with an honest outlook, I suppose, acknowledging the good and the bad that happened.
Because it's often in the face of the greatest evil that the greatest goods come.
Yep, and this story is Desmond Doss was a wonderful example of that. So, overall, good movie.
Solid movie, yeah.
Any further comments, I suppose?
That's about the stuff I wanted to talk about in this film. Anything hit you, Riley?
Did you get hit, son?
I feel like it's one you gotta see to really kind of get the flavor and feel of. That's what it sounds like.
Because the story is cool and inspiring enough.
Pretty
when you listen
straightforward.
To it. Like, spoilers, it's a real life thing. So.
Yeah, it's about the presentation. Like you're saying, to kind of get the sense of it. It's not gratuitous, I would say.
Yeah.
Toes the line in a couple of areas, but not too bad. So, well then.
Yeah.
This was good. We're back in the saddle at least this week. So
this week.
Yeah.
Can't guarantee in all the future.
Yeah. Long story short, I've been on the road every weekend for like a month. So that's part of why.
Except for the weekends I haven't been on the road, or the ones that you have, and vice versa.
Yeah. But if anybody's listening to this who doesn't already watch the stream, we've been consistently streaming every Wednesday at 7:00. I've been playing through Twilight Princess.
It's about halfway through at this point.
Yeah. So you can check us out at Pacifist on Twitch.
And also, where can they listen to this if they're listening to this?
Yeah. Where can they listen to this if they're listening to this?
I think it's funny that in your ending script, it's like, hey, listen to us on these platforms that you're already listening to us on.
It's not just me either. Like, granted, like, you want to make people aware of their options, but odds are if they're listening to you on one
maybe they're playing it for their friend in a car and they don't know where they
there you go.
Maybe.
So I guess all that by way of saying thanks for listening to the Palladium Papists. You can listen to us on Spotify, Stitcher, nobody listens to Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts.
Except Nathan's mom.
Yeah. Fair enough. Leave us a rating to let us know what you think of the show, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Papists. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, or suggestions for future episodes, email us at palladiumpapists@gmail.com. And also, if you want to catch us streaming on Wednesdays at 7 Central on at Palapapists on Twitch. So twitch.tv/Palapapists. yeah, so we'll catch you either there or in the next podcast episode. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.